Can I begin? Great. Thank you very much for coming today. My name is Daniel Konikoff, and I am the Interim Director of the Privacy, Technology, and Surveillance Program at the Canadian Civil Liberties Association. Today's INDU meeting this afternoon is full of voices from across civil society and advocacy, and we are joined right now by representatives from the International Civil Liberties Monitoring Group, and we will be joined shortly by representatives from the Privacy and Access Council of Canada and the Toronto Metropolitan University's Dais. We will also be providing a quote from the organization Open Media, who will be appearing as a virtual witness this afternoon. We are pleased that the committee has invited members of civil society to offer their perspective on these complex matters before committee today, and we hope that civil society's concerns are heard both today as well as committee progresses. We are taking this opportunity to outline some of our concerns that we'll be expressing this afternoon, and we commend the Minister for providing some amendments to this bill that we'll be speaking to. However, a lot of our concerns that we'll be raising are not captured by these proposed amendments or the forthcoming amendments, such as our belief that the Artificial Intelligence and Data Act warrants a reset. So I'm speaking on behalf of the Canadian Civil Liberties Association this afternoon. Our written submission features 23 recommendations that cover both parts or all parts of the bill, but this afternoon we'll be focusing on 3 specific recommendations. The first is bolstering the lack of rights protections in the bill, both with respect to privacy as an issue that applies not only to the privacy bill, but also to the Artificial Intelligence Act, but also focusing on the importance of equality and the right to equality as it is sorely lacking within the proposed legislation. We will also be highlighting the lack of information or the lack of regulation, around sensitive information, specifically biometric information, which is otherwise lacking in Bill C-27. And finally, we will be speaking to consent carve-outs on the basis of businesses' legitimate interests, which allow for these broad sweeping exemptions or businesses' ability for businesses' capacity to conduct business without acquiring consumer consent. So that is what CCLA will be speaking to this afternoon, and I'm now going to pass it on to Tim McSorley.
Thank you, Daniel. As Daniel said, my name is Tim McSorley. I'm the National Coordinator of the International Civil Liberties Monitoring Group. We're a coalition of 45 Canadian civil society groups that works to defend civil liberties in the context of national security and anti-terrorism laws. Like the CCLA, we have overarching concerns about the lack of rights protections in Bill C-27. Both the Consumer Privacy Protection Act and the Artificial Intelligence and Data Act contain unacceptably broad exceptions to allow for the use of private, personal information and of AI tools for national security purposes. These are detailed in the brief that ICLMGS submitted to the Committee on Industry and Technology and that we'll be speaking to later today. Canada's national security and anti-terrorism activities are already shrouded in secrecy, and it is imperative that clear rules are put in place to protect fundamental rights and to defend against racial, political, and religious profiling and discrimination. Unfortunately, much of Bill C-27 fails to do so. We are particularly concerned with the Artificial Intelligence and Data Act. Provisions of ADA would exempt AI tools developed by the private sector for exclusive use by federal national security agencies from any regulation whatsoever. This includes the Department of National Defence, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, and the Communications Security Establishment. This means that the development and use of artificial intelligence for some of the riskiest purposes and that pose the greatest risk to violating fundamental rights will go unchecked. This is not the only problem with ADA. The Act was developed without adequate public consultation. It fails to integrate appropriate human rights protections. It lacks fundamental definitions. And egregiously, the proposed AI and Data Commissioner would not have the independence necessary in order to properly enforce the provisions of the Act. As others have also said, ADA is not fit for purpose. The government must hit reset and develop an appropriate framework for regulating AI. We have shared this call with the Minister of Innovation and members of the committee in a joint letter signed by over 40 members of civil society, experts in the field of AI, civil liberties, and human rights. We must see AI developed responsibly in Canada in a way that ensures that human rights and civil liberties are protected. AI doesn't do that, and people in Canada deserve better. Thank you, and I'll pass it along to Sharon.
Thank you so much. I'm here representing the members of the Privacy and Access Council of Canada, who are the data protection professionals in public sector and private sector organizations across our country and beyond. And we've had opportunity to look at the current bill and its predecessor, and they both are lacking significantly. I've heard it said that definition determines outcome. And when you look at the CCPA, the very first word is consumer. The bill looks at Canadians not as individuals with a fundamental right to privacy. It looks upon us all as consumers. It provides carve-outs to enable businesses to make the determination whether the information they collect about us is going to have an impact on us. That's self-serving. It allows companies and organizations to call the shots, basically. We have no say. And although some people say that this bill will give us greater powers and consent, it allows the same vague language that we've had in PIPEDA for the last 20 years. Other people say that this bill is important to update PIPEDA, except they also say that they don't like it because it does not provide for privacy. It doesn't do a lot of things. It doesn't keep up with international law, whether out of the US that was just announced by the President on AI. It doesn't keep up with Europe and the UK. It falls short in so many ways that it's going to be another perhaps 20 years of enduring the harms that this bill is going to cause. We hope that the legislators take very seriously the concerns of the members of our organization and my colleagues' organizations and give sober thought to the ramifications and the unintended consequences that will happen not just to their electorate, but to them and their children as well, as we continue to be subjected to facial recognition, to artificial intelligence, to all sorts of harms in the name of economic gain, which I appreciate is important, but not when you're freely trading away our privacy just for commercial gain. And now, my colleague, Sam.
Thanks, Sharon, and thanks, folks, for being here. My name's Sam Andry. I am the Managing Director of the Dais, a think tank at Toronto Metropolitan University. I'm going to focus my remarks today on the AI and Data Act portion of the bill. AI systems have the potential to have a transformative impact on our economy and our daily lives, but they also pose significant risks, including systemic forms of discrimination, psychological harm, and malicious use. To reach AI's full potential and increase adoption beyond current levels of only about 4% of businesses, we need a responsible governance framework. Unfortunately, the current bill fails to adequately do that. I'm going to highlight three measures that we're hoping that legislators are going to address in the coming weeks and months. First, the bill's definition of harm is narrowly focused on individuals. Harms of AI systems can also occur at broader group and community levels. Things like collective harms that are manipulative and exploitative, things like election interference, harm to the environment, or collective harms to children would fall outside the current definition. Second, the proposed regulatory model in the AI Act does not create sufficient independence from the ISED minister, who has both competing roles of championing the economic benefits of AI while regulating and enforcing its risks. The proposed commissioner needs to be independent from the minister, ideally through a parliamentary appointment, with the sufficient resources and processes to support their role. And then finally, the current bill only applies to the private sector. Minister Champagne has proposed that this bill will apply to a number of AI systems used by public sector actors like the police and healthcare. And so private sector developers are going to be subject to greater regulations than our government themselves, which we think creates a double standard and not in keeping with how the EU and other countries are moving forward with AI regulation, and that Parliament needs to prioritize the development of AI regulation holistically, including for the public sector. I just want to close by saying Canada's investments in developing AI systems, which it's done quite successfully, have not been yet matched by a comparable effort to regulate its risks. We're encouraged that the committee and the minister both are open to amendments that will strengthen this bill, and there's a large community across Canada ready to help do so. Thanks.
And I just have a prepared statement from the Executive Director of Open Media, who will be joining the committee meeting this afternoon virtually and is unable to be here right now, Matt Hatfield. So Matt Hatfield from Open Media says, in Bill C-27, our government is forcing long overdue privacy reforms into an omnibus package with AI regulation that simply isn't ready. Open Media fights for comprehensive protections for Canadians that have no weak links in the chain of enforcement and no get-out-of-jail-free cards for companies that seek to abuse our data and our rights. Right now, Bill C-27 fails on both these fronts. We're very disappointed to see our government attempting to manage an issue as critical as regulating new artificial intelligence technologies with minimal input from experts and rights defenders. This began when they skipped a full public consultation on artificial intelligence and continues with what appears to be a witness plan designed to minimize our ability to speak to the evident issues with their AI proposals. Nonetheless, today Open Media will be asking the Indu Committee to fix some of C-27's gaps, close corporate loopholes, and provide a strong foundation for rapidly updating AI regulations, as we learn more about how new forms of AI may help Canadians, but also how they can compromise our welfare and our rights. That concludes the prepared statements. Thank you.
I'll go to questions.
Raisa Patel, the Toronto Star. My question is about AI, so maybe Tim or Sam, I'm not sure anyone can answer. Obviously, the AI Safety Summit is going on in the UK right now. The Bletchley Declaration was what came out of that, and Canada was one of the signatories to that. I just wanted to get your thoughts on what you make of that document. Is it sort of the same old lines that we've heard in this sphere so far, or is it a positive development to you?
I think in general, global governance efforts around technology like this are positive. So I think, in some ways it's encouraging that so many folks have come to the table, including Canada. I think, though, it has to be backed up by, real domestic legislation that has teeth to make these global governance efforts work. And I think in a number of ways, Canada's bill is already out of step with what the EU is doing. The UK is taking a slower approach to regulation. But so I think some of Minister Champagne's proposed amendments that he signaled he wants to make take us closer to the EU model. So I think that's good from, a global governance perspective of trying to align these things among allied jurisdictions. But at least with respect to Canada's legislation, there's, I think, a ways to go to kind of live up to that vision. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And at this summit, sorry, did you want to? Okay. At this summit, it sort of seems like Canada is trying to position itself as a world leader on the AI front, and is doing a lot of work around that. Do you agree with that assessment, or kind of, as you said earlier, are we moving too far ahead and we don't have the protections in place to back up how we're positioning ourselves?
I mean, I think Canada is a leader in some respects. Some of the greatest AI minds in the world are Canadians. We have invested a lot in developing the human capital and the R&D to build these systems. So I don't think it's just us being boisterous. I think there's a real track record. I think there's maybe two things I would say where we need to develop and go quicker. One is regulation, which we were talking about, and then the second is on adoption. Only 4% of Canadian businesses, as I mentioned, are using AI. Canada has struggled to take R&D and scale it into big companies that can compete on the global stage, and we're already seeing through, Microsoft and Google's moves in this space how Canada's companies could potentially get crowded out. So I think it's right to feel proud of our track record, but we have to take advantage of that head start.
I'd like to add a couple of side remarks on this one. There was quite some objection to the attendee list at the summit that big tech and the Elon Musks of the world and government people were the ones who were invited, and civil society was shut out. That's a very, very important thing to note, because again, like CCPA, it promotes business. And of course, we all need business and jobs and taxes to support social programs. Things run on money, it's a given. But to ignore, to disregard, to dismiss the input of the people who are on the ground looking at the social, the individual implications, the implications for children and mental health, that's a significant gap. And I quote from Rishi Sunak, who said, he urged against rushing to regulate AI technology, saying that it needs to be fully understood first. They already say they don't understand it, they can't follow what it's doing, but they want to wait even longer to be able to understand and fall farther and farther behind. It makes no sense to take that approach. There needs to be solid, good legislation right now, not bad legislation sometime in the future after the harms have been increased.
Maybe if I can just add one thing on that. I think the point of the lack of civil society participation at the latest summit is key, and it's reflected domestically as well, as I think many of us have raised. There's been a real lack of consultation with the public and with civil society in the development of ADA. Since this bill was introduced a year ago, multiple, and even before that, multiple voices from civil society have raised concerns and asked for a public consultation, asked for the government to explain its thinking, and then to no response. And then it was only at the beginning of the committee hearings that the minister said, yes, we will consider bringing amendments to ADA and the CPPA. And while some amendments to CPPA have been shared with the committee, absolutely nothing in terms of amendments has been shared with the committee around ADA. And so we're actually going into this meeting today to discuss our concerns with ADA, not knowing what the government is envisioning in terms of any possible amendments. We know what general areas they might want to address, which already don't go far enough. But it's a real, it's a shame, and it's also feels a little hypocritical if the government is going to say we want to be a leader on AI, that they're not engaging in the kind of consultation that we would hope other countries globally would also be engaging in with civil society and human rights organizations beyond the important consultation that they do with the AI sector. We need to be working together across all the different sectors, but unfortunately, right now, an important part has been left out of the Canadian discussion.
And, if I can speak less to the process piece, but to the question of where Canada is situated within the global conversation, I'd point to some international comparators, like specifically the European Union's General Data Protection Regulation, which is very explicitly rights-focused. If we're going to look at this through that rights-based lens, the GDPR outlines a right of access, a right to rectification of data, a right to erasure, a right to restrict processing. It's very chock-a-block with rights-based language. And if you even look at the EU's AI Act, there were some amendments that were proposed this past June that strengthen that rights-based leaning, some things that flag, the protection of fundamental rights and the operation of potentially controversial or potentially consequential AI systems like those that use biometric data, things that want to bolster those concerns that these technologies can pose to human dignity and equity and things of that nature. So those are at least two tangible examples where I'd say Canada is, could look at elsewhere for a model. Yeah.
We'll now take questions from Zoom. If you have a question, please use raised hand function. Si vous avez une question, utilisez la fonction main levée.